By 2018, my friend Alex and I had been hiking buddies for years, and we went through the mountains of Montana and Wyoming together, braved the deserts of Utah, and scaled the peaks of the Rocky Mountains side by side. But next on our list was the Cellway Bitterroot Wilderness, or the Cellway as everyone calls it. We planned to hike in, camp out, and search for a rare plant species that I had been studying for months. We loaded up the car, drove north from Nevada to Idaho, and set out for what was supposed to be a straightforward long-haul trip. The drive took 2 days of heading up the I-90, then east into Montana's interior, and before long, we saw the Cellway's 1.3 million acres sprawled out ahead of us. A chunk of land so big that it dwarfed anything we tackled before. We parked at a trailhead near the Loxa River in a gravel lot with a faded sign warning about bears and wildfires, and then pulled our packs out from the trunk. They were really heavy, but seeing as they contained our food, tent, sleeping bags, water filters, and much more, they were our entire lives at that moment. The first day we stuck to the trail, moving steadily through the pine and fir trees, and the forest was very quiet, but it was kind of a gentle quiet, and we managed to make it around 8 miles before we ended up camping near a creek at dusk. And day 2 was pretty much more of the same. We pushed deeper into the woods. The trail was winding through the valleys and up ridges as the underbrush started to get thicker, and it was swallowing up the path entirely in certain spots. We didn't talk much. We just walked, ate some trail mix, and checked out our maps every so often to make sure that we were headed in the right direction. At the end of the day, we pitched the tent on a flat patch of ground, boiled water for some instant noodles, and then pretty much slept like the dead. 18 miles in, the Cellway felt like home. We felt dialed in, and we were ready for more. On the 3rd day, we started to feel a little restless, for want of a better word. Trails were fine for tourists, but we'd come for something real. So when Alex suggested that we ditch the path and cut cross-country, and see what most people missed, I didn't argue. We veered off the trail, and the change was almost instant. The woods turned very dense with trunks wider than my shoulders and roots that started to sprawl out like veins under the dirt. Moss was pretty much draped on everything, starting to dull the light of the sun coming in and carpeting the forest floor so thick that it was almost like a sponge under our feet. We moved a little slower, avoiding rabbit holes and scrambling over fallen logs. And while it made for much rough going, it truly was worth it. The place felt completely untouched, like we traveled back in time by almost 1,000 years. Then, at one point, Alex suddenly stops and tilts his head to the side like he'd heard something. A second later, I caught it too. This low hum, steady and very out of place. It wasn't the wind or running water. It sounded artificial, almost mechanical. And Alex and I didn't say anything to each other. We just obeyed our sort of mutual curiosity and followed that noise. The sound grew louder as we pushed forward. Then, after a few minutes, we broke through a thicket of saplings and saw it. A bunker sunk into a low rise. A steel door was crooked in the frame, and its concrete shell appeared to be covered in scratched symbols, circles, zigzags, or lines that twisted into nothing really recognizable. And the hum came from inside. Once we were close enough, we could hear that it was some kind of heavy metal music, all distorted and screaming vocals. It was then that I saw the door hung almost ajar, just an inch, but enough to allow the noise inside to spill out. Alex and I stopped dead in our tracks, just a few feet short of the bunker's door. The music was aggressive and violent, either death metal or some kind of hardcore. But it wasn't the kind of music that had us approaching with such caution. It was the thought of the people playing it inside. Alex shot me a look. I mean, sure, there was a chance that it was just a bunch of metalheads throwing a party in some old abandoned metal bunker. But what if it wasn't just that, you know? What if they were way out in the middle of nowhere for a reason? I remember looking back at Alex and gently leaning my head back in the direction we'd come as if to say, "Let's get out of here." And he nodded. Then we turned to leave. We were aiming to put miles between us and that place before dark, and neither of us wanted to find out who was down there or what they were doing. But we'd only gone a few hundred yards before they found us. We were walking along discussing who in the hell would build a bunker way out in the middle of nowhere when two men stepped out from the tree line like they'd been waiting for us. They were wearing full camo with faces hidden behind balaclavas, and each held a rifle that looked like something like an AK. Barrels were down but gripped very tightly. My blood turned to ice as Alex and I stopped cold. I could hear him breathing beside me, and I knew that he was sizing them up the same as I was. The two men didn't move. They just stood there for a second, eyes locked on us through those slits in their masks, with the hum from that bunker faintly audible through the trees behind us. And then suddenly one of them raised their rifle. "On your knees," he said. "Arms up." His voice was flat, cold, and there was no room for debate. I looked at Alex. His hands were moving toward his pack straps. Counting the people back in the bunker, we were obviously outnumbered. And considering our pistols were still in our packs, we were incredibly outgunned too. I started to ease my arms up, buying time. When Alex moved, he unclipped his pack, let it drop, and then took off running. The thought of it hitting the ground snapped me out of that haze of fear that had come over me, and then yanked my own straps free, ditching that weight, and bolted after him. As we ran, a shot cracked out overhead, loud enough to make my ears ring. The bark exploded off a tree to my left, showering me with splinters. I ducked, legs pumping, weaving in and out of the tree trunks as I followed Alex. And then behind me, I heard someone yelling, "Ceasefire. We need them alive." After hearing that, I thought that they'd ease up. But maybe only a few seconds later, more shots started coming out. Lower now, kicking up the dirt around my feet. They weren't aiming to kill. They wanted us slowed down, crippled, easier to drag back. My lungs were burning, but I kept going. Alex was ahead of me, dodging tree trunks, but I matched him step for step. The gunfire suddenly stopped at one point, but we kept on running. I didn't know how far we ran. It had to have been a mile or two, but eventually we stopped. My legs were shaking. My chest was heaving as Alex braced against a tree. We checked to see if there was anything behind us, but there was nothing. No gunshots, no shouts, just the wind rustling the canopy. We'd lost the men shooting at us, but we'd also lost our packs, meaning all of our food, gear, and maps were now in their hands. It was a pretty bad situation, one of the worst you could ever wish for. But there was nothing else to do but keep moving. So that's what we did. Without our tents and sleeping bags, that first night was brutal. The temperature dropped fast, cold seeping through my clothes and into my bones, and my stomach growled loud in the quiet, but there was nothing to eat. And we just huddled against a fallen log, and jackets were pulled tight around us. I kept my eyes open, expecting those men to creep up on us in the dark with the rifles ready, but they didn't. Alex barely slept either. We just sat there waiting for dawn. Morning eventually came, and with it, it brought hunger. We found some berries growing on a low bush. They were sour and barely ripe, and ate a handful, and I grimaced as everything was staining my fingers, and Alex did the same. We knew enough to avoid the toxic stuff. Years of hiking paying off, but it wasn't enough to silence the hunger pangs. We eventually used the sun as a guide when it peeked through the trees, and we started moving south and towards the car. My head ached, this dull thud behind my eyes, but we had to keep moving. And the forest just stretched on, swallowing every sound but just our footsteps, and my boots were rubbing blisters into my heels. And we walked all day, stopping only to scoop water from some stream with our hands. Night eventually came again, and we found a shallow dip under an overhang of rock. We couldn't light a fire as that was probably too risky, but we had no food to cook anyway. I eventually slept in little bits, waking up to every rustle of leaves or shift of the wind. And day 3, I have to say, was the worst. My legs felt like lead. We found more berries, a few edible roots that Alex recognized, but again, they barely touched the hunger. My vision blurred at the edges, and exhaustion was starting to sink deep. I lost track of time, and just followed Alex's back as he trudged along ahead. He didn't look much better than I did. His shoulders were slumped, and his pace was slowing. And we didn't talk about the men or the bunker or the guns. We just didn't say anything at all. We just kept walking. When we hit the dirt road, I swear that I could have cried with relief. It was nothing but a thin, rutty track cutting through the trees, barely wide enough for a truck, but my God, it was a road. We stumbled along it until a ranger station came into view. It was a low wooden building with a pickup parked out front. We were filthy, scratched up, our eyes sunken into their sockets. The ranger inside, a guy with a gray beard and a faded USFS patch, took one look at us and said, "I'll get you boys some coffee." And as we sipped from our cups, we told him everything. The bunker, the weird graffiti that we saw on the side with the symbols, the men with the rifles, and the fact that they chased us. He called the police, who showed up an hour later and took our statements and then sent rangers to check that spot. And we were hopeful. But when those rangers came back, they said the bunker was completely empty. No people, no gear, just the concrete shell and those scratched up symbols. There was no sign of our packs either, and the police didn't seem surprised. One of them even said the Cellway had a history of militia activity, armed groups that had gathered, trained, and sometimes partied out there away from prying eyes. He figured we'd probably crossed paths with a nasty one, violent types who didn't like witnesses, and we were lucky to be alive. They told us not to go back, not through that area anyway, and that was it. No arrests, no leads, just a warning and a shrug. And driving home, Alex stared out the passenger window, staying silent almost the whole way. I gripped the wheel. My knuckles were turning white, just replaying all of that in my head. The forest that had been ours once, a place of sanctuary and recreation. But on the drive back, it felt like something else, something hostile and uninviting. Alex and I didn't talk about hiking again for a while. Not in the Cellway, not anywhere. And I've often wondered who those men were, and if they ever returned, rifles in hand, watching for the next pair of idiots to step too close. Alex and I had been trekking through Redwood National Park since dawn, camera equipment in tow, trying to capture the perfect shot for our nature photography project. The sunlight filtering through the trees created an otherworldly atmosphere, and we were determined to bottle it up in our photos. By noon, my legs ached, and I could tell Jamie was feeling it too. We stopped to consult the map and recharge. We found a clearing off the path with a massive tree stump that looked sturdy enough to support our gear. I set down my backpack, pulled out my water bottle, and took a long swig while Jamie unfolded the map. He was always better with directions, so I let him navigate while I reviewed our shots. Jamie muttered to himself, tracing a finger along the map when suddenly, a colossal shadow slid over us like someone had flipped a switch. I froze, camera still raised to my eye, as I looked up. The sky was a brilliant blue with not a cloud in sight. Jamie's head snapped up, his eyes wide with concern. "What the?" He trailed off. I didn't respond immediately, my gaze darting around, scanning the treetops and skies for any sign of what might have caused the shadow. But there was nothing, no planes, no birds, just an eerie silence. The breeze hit next, stiff and cold, rustling the trees and kicking up dust. It felt like it was chasing whatever had passed over us. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and Jamie's face paled. "You saw that, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, still scanning the horizon. We stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. The woods were quiet, no birds chirping, no leaves rustling. It was as if everything was holding its breath. I expected something to burst through the trees or drop from the sky, but there was nothing. The sun shone brightly, like it had never left. "We should go," I said finally, and Jamie didn't argue. He stuffed the map into his backpack, and we started moving, our eyes fixed on the sky. We didn't stick to the trail. Instead, we headed straight back the way we came, cutting through bushes and trees. Every light breeze or rustle made me jump, and I knew Jamie felt the same. It took us an hour to reach the parking lot, where Jamie's truck was still parked. I was relieved to see it, and we threw our gear in the back without a word. For a while, we just sat there, catching our breath. Jamie broke the silence. It was probably just a bird, like a hawk or something flying low. His tone was unconvincing, but I nodded along. We drove back to town in silence, the radio filling the space between us. Every now and then, Jamie glanced at me, and I knew he was still shaken. When we got to my place, he didn't linger like he usually did. He just said he'd see me later and drove off. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the shadow and the breeze. I told myself it was just our imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual had occurred. Weeks went by, and we didn't discuss it again. Life returned to normal, but every time I'm outdoors, I find myself looking up, half expecting to see that shadow again. I looked it up online once, typing in phrases like big shadow in sky and unexplained phenomena. But the results were just conspiracy theories and blurry photos. None of it seemed to fit. Whatever we saw, it felt like something that didn't belong. Jamie and I still hang out, but we rarely go on trips like that anymore. It's not like we decided to stop, it just happened. There's a quiet understanding between us, a shared secret we don't touch. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, circling the woods, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. I'll never forget how small it made me feel, standing in that clearing, watching the sky for something that never showed itself. I was part of a search and rescue team dispatched to Redwood National Forest in the summer of 1995. The call came in late Tuesday night, just as I was finishing a shift at the station. Ryan Mitchell, a local hiker who had been walking the trails for years, hadn't returned from one of his solo trips. His wife had waited until Monday evening before she called, figuring he'd just stayed out longer than expected. When he still wasn't back by Tuesday, she gave us the details and a description of his gear. His last known location was a trailhead near the Smith River, and his intended destination was a ridge around 8 miles north. As we gathered at the trailhead just before dawn on Wednesday, around 30 to 40 of us, including local law enforcement and civilian volunteers, loaded up with radios, first aid kits, maps, rope, and flashlights. We split the search area into a grid, and my team took the western edge near the river, while others fanned out east. The plan was to sweep north, hit the ridge by nightfall, find Ryan, and bring him home. At exactly 5:47 a.m., we hit the trails. The first few hours dragged on with little to report. We moved slow, scanning for broken branches, scuffed dirt, or anything that might show Ryan had passed through. Then, around noon, one of my team members radioed in. He'd found something. I adjusted my course and hiked a half-mile east to meet the rest of my team. When I got there, they were all looking up at a backpack lodged in a tree about 30 feet off the ground. It was an osprey, with a blue patch stitched on the side, just like Ryan's wife had described. The pack was torn open, its straps flapping, and contents spilled out onto the branches and ground below. One of my team members, Alex, volunteered to climb up and retrieve it. The tree was thin, its branches too slender to hold much weight, yet the pack was stuck up there, like it had been thrown with force. When Alex brought it down, we saw the damage up close. The fabric was shredded with long gashes running through it. No bites or scratches, just sharp tears. Inside, Ryan's water bottle was cracked, and a soggy sandwich sat half-eaten and crushed with dirt. 2 hours later, one of my team members radioed in again. She'd found one of Ryan's boots in a small clearing. I hiked over, and there it was, a brown leather boot with laces tied, standing upright like Ryan had stepped right out of it. No blood, no damage, just the boot sitting alone. We marked the spot and moved on, figuring the other boot would turn up close by. About an hour later, another team called from the eastern edge of the search ring, almost 2 miles away. They'd found the second boot, but it wasn't empty. Ryan's foot was still inside, cut off just above the ankle. The bone break wasn't clean, and a few flies were circling it. The blood was still sticky, meaning it hadn't been there long. After that, the forest started to feel heavier. We widened the search, breaking the grid into tighter sections, and noticed blood splatters everywhere. We marked the spots with flags, but there was no pattern. The blood was smeared on trunks, dotted on branches, and splattered on rocks. As night fell, We set up a base camp near the ridge, planning to rest and continue at dawn. But I couldn't sleep. The forest was too quiet, and then I heard a branch snap, loud and sharp, about 100 yards out. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and swept the beam across the trees, but I didn't see anything move. Morning didn't bring relief. We packed up and pushed north, following the blood trail. It kept going, smeared on trunks, dotted on branches, and splattered on rocks. Some spots were so high I had to tilt my head back to see them. We stopped trying to make sense of it and just kept going, hoping to find Ryan or what was left of him. By noon on the second day, we'd reached the outer edge of the search area, but the prospects of finding Ryan alive were slim. We called off the search on the afternoon of the third day. Ryan was obviously dead. We radioed it in, packed up, and left the rest to local law enforcement. The official report listed it as an animal attack, but I knew it wasn't right. No animal could toss a pack 30 feet into a tree or spread blood across miles of forest like some deliberate mark. I kept the map from that search, with little X's in red ink marking the blood spots. I don't look at it often, but when I do, I feel a shiver run down my spine. Ryan was gone, but something else was there, waiting in the woods. I used to be a wildlife biologist back in the late 90s, working in gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. On paper, the job was simple: track wildlife, note habitat changes, and map the terrain. But out there, it was anything but. The park stretched over 8 million acres, a vast wilderness of mountains, forests, and rivers. In late August 1998, I was deep in the interior, farther than I'd ever gone before. My pack was heavy with gear, and the nearest road was a 4-day hike away. I was completely alone, which was how I liked it. The day started normally. I woke up at dawn, broke camp, and headed north through a valley. I'd been following a river, tracking wildlife for a survey, when the landscape ahead started to look off. The plants seemed to be leaning away from something. As I stepped closer, I saw it, a strange, pulsating ring about 10 feet wide. Everything within it seemed altered. The plants were twisted, and the air seemed to vibrate. I felt a growing sense of unease as I approached the center. There, I found a small depression, about 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide. I stood over it, staring down, and felt a chill run up my spine. I was being watched. I quickly pulled out my camera and took photos, but my hands were shaking. I took wide angles of the ring and close-ups of the depression. The shutter clicked with each photo. Afterward, I packed up and started my trek back, anxious to get away from the site. The walk was long, about 8 hours, and I planned to camp another night. But after seeing that strange ring, I wanted solid walls around me. The first few hours were fine, but then a headache started. I stopped and drank water, but it didn't help. My vision started blurring, and my balance was off. By the time I reached the ranger station, I was stumbling. The ranger on duty, a woman named Rachel, looked up and froze. I must have looked terrible. She grabbed the radio and called for a medical pickup. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask over my face. The doctors said I had a severe allergic reaction, possibly to a plant or insect bite. I tried to tell them about the ring, but they just nodded politely. When I was discharged, I handed over my camera to my boss, Alex. The photos came back developed, but the ones of the ring were just a strange, grainy mess. No one believed me, and I felt like they thought I was crazy. I tried to explain, but without proof, it was just my word. Alex told me to drop it, and I tried to move on. But the memory stuck with me. I started warning new team members to stay away from anything unusual. They just laughed, but I meant every word. The wilderness hides things that can hurt you. Years later, after retirement, I moved to a small town in Alaska. The nightmares faded, but the memory remained. I'm old now, and I still wonder what I saw. I'd like to know the truth, but at my age, it doesn't matter as much. If I ever see something like that again, I'll be walking the other way. few months ago, I decided to tackle the Ravens Peak Trail by myself. It wasn't something I did often, but I'd been feeling restless, like I needed to challenge myself physically. I'm a freelance writer, and my work had been piling up, so I thought a solo hike would clear my head. I grabbed my gear, threw a water bottle into my backpack, and drove out to the trailhead. It was about an hour and a half from my house, nestled in the mountains I'd always wanted to explore. The drive was serene, just me, the hum of my engine, and the peaks blurring past the windows. I parked my car in a small parking lot near the trailhead, locked it up, and started climbing. But that's where things get fuzzy. The next clear memory I have is me driving back home, hands on the wheel, and the sun dipping low like hours had just slipped by, but everything between is gone. There was a black spot in my head, like someone snipped out a chunk of film and stitched the ends back together. I tried to piece everything back together that night, sitting on my couch with a cup of coffee that I barely touched. I could picture myself pulling into that parking lot, the gravel that was under my tires, the faded metal sign marking the trail, and I could even see myself climbing steadily along the trail. There's this one fleeting image that keeps popping up, me walking through the mountains, everything calm, but with a strange feeling that someone's watching me. Everything else is just a blank wall in my mind before I'm back in my car, driving home like nothing happened. It unnerved me badly, and I kept asking myself what the hell could have happened, but I couldn't think of anything. The next day, I took a break from work. My head was feeling heavy, and I couldn't focus, and I kept staring at my hiking boots by the door. They seemed to be caked in mud, little rocks sticking in the laces, and all the proof that I'd been out there, I guess. But I couldn't remember climbing through that terrain or spotting the peculiar rock formations. I started wondering if I'd experienced some kind of episode. So, I went to see a specialist. She ran some tests and asked questions. She checked my vitals and reflexes, and she said I seemed fine, but might be experiencing some stress-related symptoms. She told me to keep a journal and monitor my episodes. I said I would, but driving home from that appointment, I felt this unease in the pit of my stomach. She said I was fine, but I didn't feel right. That evening, I remember sitting on the couch in front of the TV, but I wasn't really watching. I was just thinking, sort of like waiting for something to click. I thought maybe I just zoned out on that hike, like when you drive somewhere familiar and don't remember the turns. But that wasn't it. This was hours upon hours that I couldn't remember, like they'd been stolen from me. So, I got up and grabbed my phone and looked up the Ravens Peak Trail online. It was an old path not many people used anymore, and I scrolled through a couple of hiking forums, hoping for something useful. One thread caught my attention. A guy who'd hiked a few years before me said he'd encountered a fellow hiker who seemed mysterious and left abruptly. He didn't mention anything about memory loss, but reading about the encounter got me thinking. And then by the time I got to overthinking, I shut my phone off and didn't look again. Days eventually turned into weeks, and I tried letting it go. I didn't tell anyone about it, not my friends or family. I mean, really, what was I going to say? Hey, I went for a hike and forgot the whole thing. They'd probably think I was losing it. I'd catch myself zoning out, staring at nothing. Sometimes I'd think it was happening again, and panic would start to hit, but thankfully it hasn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened with that time lost was tied to that trail, and the mysterious encounter still lingers in my mind. When I was a kid, my family loved exploring the outdoors. My dad was a park ranger stationed at Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, so we often went to a secluded lake near Estes Park, especially in the fall when the aspens turned bright yellow and orange. The drive took about an hour and a half, but the winding road was intimidating. It hugged tight against rock walls on one side with a steep drop on the other. Sometimes cars had to creep past each other, inches from the cliff, and I'd look out my window and see tiny trees far below, and I remember feeling a bit queasy. One trip stands out recently. I was thrilled because we were camping in a tent, a rare treat for me. My dad's fear of bears usually meant day trips or cabins, but this time we borrowed a sturdy tent from a friend. My parents, my siblings, and our 2 dogs piled into the car. We reached the campsite by a creek in the late afternoon and set up the tent, laughing as the dogs chased each other. We built a fire, ate some burgers, and then when it got dark, we doused the fire and crawled into our sleeping bags. I fell asleep to the sound of the creek, but sometime later, I woke up. One of our dogs was growling low, his fur bristling, and at first, I thought it was just a raccoon because earlier we'd seen a few rummaging around. Then I heard the sound of sticks snapping and leaves crunching. The sound of someone moving through the forest outside. My whole body froze, stiff as a board. Someone was out there moving around our camp. I was so scared I could barely breathe. The snapping got louder, and I heard it circle the tent slowly. The dog's growling got louder, but I stayed still, too scared to move. And I could tell the person was rummaging around, maybe checking our stuff. I even tugged at the car door, but it was locked. Was it a camper from another site? Someone lost? Or something else? I heard the snapping again, louder right by the tent, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that they'd go away. The dog growled sharper, and suddenly the snapping stopped. They then started again, faster and moving away. I laid there. My heart was pounding until I couldn't hear them anymore. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, but eventually, I heard my dad's whisper. He'd been awake the whole time listening too, and he didn't say it, but I could tell he was scared. He waited a bit, shook my mom and siblings awake, and then announced that we were leaving. We packed up fast. No one talked much, just stuffed sleeping bags and tore down the tent by flashlight. And the dogs stayed close, but they were still on edge. It was around 1 a.m. when we piled into that car. The mountain road was darker than ever, and as we drove, I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see someone in the shadows. My dad mentioned seeing cars full of hikers heading up earlier, and he said maybe it was one of them, but he didn't sound too sure. We got home safe, but I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. Was it someone who was lost looking for help? A curious camper? Or something else entirely? I'll never know. But even now, years later, when I hear the sound of sticks snapping in the forest, my heart skips a beat.